Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And I feel like we've won the Irish sweepstakes today. We have we've had two wonderful Irish authors here with us. Dervla McTiernan, who is tuning in from Australia. Barbara will explain the complicated time stuff we have going on. I think it's like 5 in the morning where you are.
Yep.
No, it's 5 tomorrow morning where she is. You have to remember the tomorrow part.
Morning. It's already Friday.
Right.
Friday.
Closer to the weekend. But she'll be talking about her brand new book, The Good Turn. And then joining us from, is it Dublin area?
Dublin, yeah.
Ryan Howard, whose new book, 56 Days, is getting raves from all over the place. And we still have a handful of signed copies left. So I'll put links for both books in the comments field. And so if you're watching and you have questions or comments or anything, just go ahead and type them in and I'll come back and be happy to ask any of your questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. This is so interesting because we just did an event with Alice Feeney, who's a wonderful UK author, has written 3 bestsellers, just published her 4th called Rock, Paper, Scissors. And at the end of it, a fan asked her, what's the book she would most recommend? And she held up your book, Catherine, 56 Days, and said, this is my recommendation. So then we had a little discussion about 56 Days, that it's not a pandemic book. It's just the pandemic is a pretext for setting up the plot. Anyway, Alice, it was bedtime for her, but she was a big fan and heavily recommends your book. So I thought you'd like to.
I loved Rock, Paper, Scissors. It's one of my favorite thrillers this year. So I love that we have this mutual fangirling thing going on. That's great to know.
Well, we'll have to get you all together. The other thing that I think is really fun, Patrick mentioned we have 2 Irish authors today, but we talked to Stuart Neville on Monday to kick off his new novel, The House of Ashes. And in the course of that, we talked about it'd be really fun to get a group of Irish writers together and just have a general talk about, Irish fiction, crime writing, whatever it is. And so we thought about, Stuart said he'd love to do it. Adrian McKinney would certainly be another possibility. John Connolly, even though most of his books are not set in Ireland, but nonetheless, you can't really escape Ireland. John Connolly, if you're going to talk about Irish writing. We kind of ruled out Ken Bruin as probably too chancy to include in our conversation, but he writes about Galway the same that Dervla does. So anyway, I'm going to work on it because I think it'd be really fun.
That would be
with any luck, most everybody would be in Ireland, except for Dervla, who lives in Perth, Australia, which is why we have this crazy thing where for Dervla, it's tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. And for Catherine, it's 10 o'clock at night today in Dublin. And for us, Patrick and me, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in Scottsdale. Patrick says Nuala O'Connor would be fun to include in this conversation too. So anyway, having overcome the time zones and thinking about, we're almost all the way around the globe, aren't we? What's the difference?
I think we have everywhere covered, really. We're sort of evenly spaced out around the globe. So we're doing well.
Just a little gap between Dublin and back to Scottsdale.
A little gap.
It's a snake.
So this is Dervla's 3rd book, and she came to my attention first because several of our staff at the Poison Pen made The Ruin, Dervla's first novel, a Poison Pen bestseller. Every time I turned around, copies had walked out the door, and we had to reorder them. And then she wrote another book about this called The Scholar. And she's won multiple prizes, including a Ned Kelly Award, which is Australia's crime writing award named after an outlaw, which I think is really, we have Edgar Allan Poe, so ours are called Edgar's. And Canada has a hangman. Although I think they have recently put away the guy dangling from the noose in favor of a more tasteful representation.
That's probably a good call.
Of the Arthur Ellis Award, because Arthur Ellis was the pseudonym that Canadian hangman, because hangmen did that because nobody wanted to know who they really were. They had pseudonyms. And so Arthur Ellis is the pseudonym for Canada's crime writing. And then I could go all around the world. France has a thing with Sweden. I think it's the Glass Bell. There are crime writing awards all over. And Dervla's has already been including a Davitt Award. And I think that the Davitt Award is the Sisters in Crime chapter in Australia, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's really impressive. And a Barry Award and an International Thriller Writers Award, et cetera. So even though she has 3 books, and this one went to #1 in Australia, Dervla's had an enormous amount of recognition. So I'm so pleased. I met her through Sulari Gentle and Emma Viskick. We've done a couple of events together as a trio from Australia. So and Dervla's actually been to visit us at the Poison Pen, and we'd love to have her back. Maybe one day we can manage to get both of you here, and then we'd solve the time problem, wouldn't we? Yeah, be great.
Hungry
So-
travel is coming
Go
back,
to-
right?
Drinks afterwards, which is even more important.
Oh, so important.
So we were
So,
lucky
and
enough
obviously,
to
yeah.
have a conversation with Catherine when 56 Days published last month. And so she's been kind enough to come back and talk to Dervla, and they have questions from each other. So I'm going to sort of retire here with my cup of tea. And Catherine, how about if you take the lead?
Absolutely. Well, Dervla, first of all, congratulations on the good turn. I know it's kind of funny because am I right in saying this book was published in Australia in February 2020?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally understand, like from a writer's point of view, you may not even remember what this book is about. So
Oh my
I'm just
God, Catherine, thank you for saying that, because I woke
Yeah.
up this morning and I said, oh my God, the first question would probably be, what's the book about? I've forgotten how to do my little, this, all
Yeah.
writers have this little potted description of their book. You get really good at
Yeah.
kind of just introducing it. I was like, practice it quick in the 5 minutes because it's just gone,
Okay, so since you practiced it, let's not let that go to waste. What is the good turn about for anyone who hasn't read it? Off
Oh
you
my
go.
Okay, wait for this. This is usually very smooth and down to like 70 seconds. It's probably going to take me
Okay.
5 minutes and go around the houses, but let me see if I get this
I'll
right.
time it.
So the main character in my books is Cormac Riley, who is a cop. We meet when he's quite young in the Ruin, and he's always been quite on the outside in Galway. He was an outsider, kind of golden boy who came back to Galway and hasn't really been liked that much. In any case, at the beginning of the book, a young girl is abducted, and Cormac and his small team are obviously trying to find her very quickly. They're doing everything they can, time's of the essence. What's strange is he's not really getting the support from senior cops that you'd expect him to get in that situation. They're really being left by themselves. And under that kind of pressure, a fatal mistake is made. As a result of which, Cormac's young colleague, Peter Fisher, is sort of banished to the wilds, to a small village where his dad is a cop, and Cormac is left in Galway. And so they're separately dealing with things. Peter's trying to just get to the bottom of a murder, and Cormac is trying to figure out exactly what is going on in the Galway police station for once and for all, and get to the bottom of some corruption that he suspects might be happening there. And that is kind of the story. I probably forgot some
Did
important things.
it. You totally did it. Well done. Well done. Just to ease you into not having to remember specific details about the book this far away from writing it. February 2020 was the last normal month that a lot of us had. And as you know, I wrote about lockdown. I'm a little bit obsessed with it, but I wanted to ask you, how was yours? Because one of the things that I've noticed is that American readers can't really believe that Ireland had such a severe lockdown. And I know Australia is looking at Ireland saying, lads, you have nothing on us. Yeah, I think Australia wins in terms of severity of lockdown. So I wanted to ask you, how was it for you and how was it for your writing? There was a little part of me that was kind of glad there was fewer distractions. It sounds awful to say it, but how was it for you?
That's so strange, guys. I mean, I finished my tour of the east coast of Australia just as COVID was beginning to become a real thing. It was right at the end of February. Not that we've known about it for a while, but people had been sort of in denial, and then the reality was hitting. So I remember being with my publicist. We were over there, and we were supposed to go to Tasmania and Brisbane were the last 2 stops. And we sat in a restaurant, and there was a real discussion about whether or not I should be going, and we should go, and whether or not we should. And we decided we'd just finish it. And then I got back to Perth. I did one Perth event, and then everything else was cancelled. And I had, like, I'm immunocompromised. So my sister's a GP in Ireland. At that point, things were getting much worse in Ireland, much faster. Australia is quite isolated, so it tends to take a bit longer here. So she rang me and she said, take the kids out of school, just take them home and shut down. So we actually ended up doing our own like mini shutdown probably 2 weeks before schools formally closed here. And then I think we had about 3-4 months maybe where the kids were home. But what's really weird is Western Australia has taken its own approach. So it's a state within Australia, if you like. And our premier here in Western Australia, Mark McGowan, just basically closed the borders. And it's been a real thing in Western Australia in Australia generally, that Western Australia has just taken this attitude: borders are closed, you're not coming in, done. Yeah. And so you couldn't get into WA unless you're willing to go through 3 weeks of hotel quarantine. And then even then it's become tighter and tighter over time. So now you can't really come in unless you get an exemption. And now we're close to this state internally. For most states, so that New South Wales is currently having a big problem with COVID. Well, big by Australian standards. Same in Melbourne. So you can't travel interstate right now. And we have had a normal life in Western Australia within this weird bubble. Like my kids have been in school. There's no community COVID at all. None. The only cases we have are a couple in hotel quarantine. So there's no spread. There's no anything. Every now and again.
Mind blowing.
It's weird. And you feel like you feel lucky. But you, like everybody else, we have this kind of constant awareness of this like doom hammer hanging above us all. And yet we're sort of in this weird protected bubble that we all know can't last. Like it's just this temporary setup, and it's almost waiting for everything to change. So the plan at the moment is we're trying to get to 80 to 90% vaccination rates, and then the borders will open. I don't know, it's not going to be a straight path. So it's just weird. From a writing point of view, like the kids have been back at school for a good while, which has been great. My biggest issue is the book I'm writing now. I'm trying to decide COVID or no COVID. And I think it's going to be COVID. And a lot of that is due to your book, which has been really inspiring and interesting, reading a story set so firmly in that time.
I have to say, Dervla, I happened to see an interview with you from like ages ago. I think it was May 2020. And you were saying, not yet, like I definitely won't because it's too soon. So tell me how has I think a lot of people's minds have been changed just because we're still in it. Like it's not something that's going away. And I loved False Witness by Karen Slaughter, which was, her typical thriller, but it happened in a real 2020. So there was masks and there was, hand washing and rules and stuff like that. But it was just in the same way you would describe someone having a mobile phone, or it was really normal. Just normal. So what are your plans?
Oh god, that's exactly the debate I'm having. So I have a book coming out next year that I've finished, and that one is pre-COVID, but the next one, it starts to feel really quite artificial to omit it in some context. And what I'd like to do is sort of set it in the semi-post-COVID world, where you have this sort of, we want it to be normal, so we're kind of pretending it is, but it keeps bubbling up and it hasn't quite been squashed yet. And that it's probably more important because I think the context of that book is set in a biotechnical kind of world. So to ignore COVID again would feel even weirder. And I can't just keep stopping time in 2019. Like that's not an option, You could do whatever you like. It feels like cheating at this stage. I think it's time to accept this reality. And I think I'm beginning to understand how to do it. And I do think for all of us as humans, it's really helpful when writers do it because it helps us to understand it and put it in context. And God, reading your book, Catherine, and just the experience of seeing it through your eyes and how it was in Dublin, which is a place I love so much and which you clearly love so much, because to me that book reads like a love letter to Dublin. But seeing it like that.
Oh, really? It was driving me bloody mad at the time.
Really? Oh my God. I don't know. To me, it just read like everywhere. I mean, there was a scene I was reading last night where they were going by Portobello and they went down by the canal.
Yeah.
And I just felt so sad because it's been so long. And just to imagine it like that, you know, and imagine them in the parks and walking.
It really was like that because, you know, I was going out and doing my little 2-kilometer radius walk and coming back in and putting like the real details onto the page, and miraculously or ironically, depending on how you want to look at it, we got amazing weather that first lockdown. Like it was summer decided to show up in April, and people had been pent up then by I think maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And there was one day where it actually did feel, I walked along the canal and onto Haddington Road, and it was like a block party. Like neighbors were like talking to each other like at a distance, and you know there was music playing, and I was like, you know, I've never seen the city like this. I was like, my apartment was driving me crazy, that's why I'm in a different apartment now, but I did love the fact that I was in such a attractive place when I was trapped, you know, and I did feel it kind of was a privilege in many ways to see the city. Like one of the things I noticed, I don't know if this happened to you, but I looked up a lot more because I didn't have to worry about walking into someone or trying to avoid someone. So I started noticing all these details about the buildings that like I had never seen before because I was too busy trying not to walk out in front of a car and die. So, you know, there was details about it that were in a way like I'm happy that I got to be there during that time, that I didn't run off to Cork with my parents or anything like that.
Do you feel like Ireland has been changed permanently by COVID? Do you think it's a different place now?
I think we don't know what we are now. I think like it's such a state of flux. I think there's been like a flight out of the cities. Everyone has realized they don't need to be paying a fortune to live in Dublin when they can work from home. A lot of people have moved out. I think, you know, that's not necessarily a good thing because now house prices are ridiculous all over the country instead of just in Dublin and Cork. So I think we're all just still a bit shell-shocked, and I think allegedly our final restrictions will be removed on the 22nd of October if all goes to plan, apart from like travel internationally and stuff. And I think at that point we'll all just it'll just be like that scene at the end of like a apocalyptic movie or an alien invasion movie where everyone sort of walks out into the daylight and looks around and like we're all tattered and, you know, did we survive this? I think honestly we're all having a kind of collective trauma at the moment, and we're too in it. And that's why with 56 days I so confined it, because I didn't have to say this is how it makes us feel and this is how it's going to affect us. And so I think in terms of writing novels, that's a clever way to get around it, because we can't know now what this is,
what's next. It felt like a witness statement. You know, I think the book is working on so many levels, but it also, one of the levels it's working on is it felt like a witness statement. And I just thought how important this is, because it captures that moment in time so beautifully. And that feeling we all had, which is like, what? Really? Yeah. This is actually happening? Oh, okay. You know, and just the shock of it.
I mean, what you were describing there sounds like being in the Truman Show. Like you have a normal life, but you go far enough and you meet like your border and you can't go any further. It's crazy.
I haven't seen my family in you know, a couple of years now. And
I was going to ask you that. Like, when was the last time you were in Ireland?
They were all due to come last year. My parents, my husband's parents, my sister was coming for the first time with her kids. And then it was all obviously cancelled. And I hadn't been home since the previous February. And so now it's 2.5 years since I've seen them in person. So it's too long, like it really is too long. And there's talk about the international borders won't open up here for quite a while longer. I mean, I think we'll be able to go with certain exclusions and parameters maybe from early next year. Home quarantine is being talked about, so hopefully, because it is getting very hard now not to see people. Zoom only goes so far, you know.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask actually, because I'm fascinated by the fact that you have set your books in Ireland. You live in Australia. Am I right in assuming that the next book, which we'll talk about in a bit, but is that set in the States? Would I be, because I did hear that. So, like, I'm fascinated by this. I set my books within a 5-kilometer radius because I'm that lazy. So what I'm interested in is like, do you think the fact that you're in Australia and the fact that you've had this time away, how many years are you there now in Australia?
10 years.
Yeah, a long time. Do you think that helps you see Ireland? Because I think like a lot of us, you know, we go work abroad in our 20s or whatever, and that's the first time we realize, oh, that's not a normal thing. That's an Irish thing. It only happens. Ireland isn't like everywhere else in the world. And obviously, you know, luckily, Irish crime fiction appeals to American readers and British readers, everything so much. Like, do you think that distance helps you? Like, do you think the books would be different if you were still living here?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't know if I'd be a writer if I was still in Ireland. I think it took me coming here to just feel free enough to give it to really just write without anybody.
Why do you feel that way? Why do you feel that way?
Well, first of all, I suppose I was a lawyer for a long time, and like I often say this, but it is very true. I was just a bit of a people pleaser and a bit of a box ticker, I suppose. Like, I do the right thing. I'm very responsible.
But I think there's a huge pressure here to do that. Like, and this is why I ask, you know, for me as well, in certain aspects of my life, it took leaving Ireland to think, oh, actually, you know what? I can do whatever I like. I don't have to go and get the degree and get the pensionable job and whatever. So, yeah, so you felt kind of a weight of expectation.
I mean, you know what it's like. You know, we were raised in a certain way, and it was like, you know, you do what you're supposed to do, and writing, you know, pay a bill,
a hobby maybe.
Like, it just wasn't ever considered an option. You just had to work really hard, go to college, get a degree that would allow you to get a good job, and then work for a good job for the rest of your life.
Oh my God, yeah.
That's the way it was. And I very much was like that. I was a good girl and I did that stuff. And then, you know, I had my own little legal practice in the west of Ireland, and then the GFC hit and it just imploded overnight.
Yeah.
And if I spent 2 or 3 years working with clients who were in an incredibly difficult situation, losing everything down to family homes, it was just really, you remember.
Can we just say global financial crisis, because people might not know the
Oh yeah, of course. In Australia they call it the GFC, so I've gotten used to it, but it's basically
we call it the bust. And
the bust, in 2007, 2008. So we worked, my husband and I stayed and we worked, and it got really, really hard. And then we decided, look, we've just had enough. We have to go. We needed a fresh start. And by the time I came here, I said, I never, ever, ever want to practice law again. But of course, old habits die hard. And I went off and I had to earn a living. I rang the equivalent of the Law Society here. And then to see what I would need to do to practice as a lawyer here. And I remember coming back to my husband and going, good news. He was like, what's the good news? I was like, well, they were running a pilot program at the time where you could, if you had so many years experience, you could just practice. And as long as you undertook to do 2 exams in 12 months, I think. I was like, good news. I can practice law.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Like, we promised each other that now we would just give ourselves permission to do whatever we wanted, you know, that this was our time. We did everything according to the rule book. And it didn't work out. And so now we get to do it our way, and hopefully we'll see what happens. And so I decided I wanted to write, but Ush, my little boy, was born 4 weeks after we landed here, and then chose not to sleep at all for 2 years. So I was working during the day and not sleeping during the night. So it took me a bit of time to get started with writing. But then once I did, even though it was slow and hard in the beginning, and I would never show anybody that early writing because it was so appallingly bad. I just knew that's it. I can't not write. I have to write forever now. Whether it's published or not doesn't matter. I just have to write. So
and where did that come from? Like, was this like a secret dream you'd had, or, you know, where did the desire come from?
I've loved books since, I mean, I started to read well before school, and books I've always carried 1 or 2 around with me. Like, it just physically had to be with me all the time. Never not been reading. Like, I'd read the back of the cornflakes box as a kid because there weren't enough books, you know, anything to just be reading. And I always, the dream of being a writer. But to me, first of all, writers were sort of like magical people, you know, like it was a different category of person. I wasn't aware of the work that goes on behind the scenes, you know. And then also, it just, you know, and then it just felt as well, wasn't realistic for me. You know, you couldn't do that and earn a living and pay your bills. So, but then when we went to Australia, I just said, I'm going to just try. I'm going to give it 5 years. I will take it as seriously as I would any change of career. I'm going to work hard at night, every night. And if nothing happens in 5 years, like if there's not even the smallest sniff that I have some kind of potential, well, then I'll think again. And even like when I think about it now, I just think that's so funny that I was thinking like that. All I was thinking is I'll work hard for 5 years. And if nothing works out, well, I'll think about it. Even then I wasn't willing to say I'll give up, you know? I just knew I couldn't let it go. And so coming here gave me the permission to just try.
I have to say, Dervla, I remember getting a proof of the rune and loving it and saying to another crime writer here who had read it as well, like, first of all, who is this person? Because we didn't know who you were and never heard of you, because obviously it was your debut. And then we said, she has to have a guard in the family, because I had never read, and like, I can have a big debate about, we'll talk about that in a sec, about authenticity and stuff like that, because I think we're between, as crime writers, we're between a rock and a hard place with accuracy, and it's one of my rants that I love to get involved in. But I had never read a Garda that felt so, Cormac, of course I'm talking about, that felt like so real, and the banter, like, you know, and not to say that it was jokey or anything, but like, it just, I felt like I was eavesdropping. It didn't feel like I was reading dialogue that a writer had written. I really felt like I was listening to them. And I said this to the other writer who is married to a guard, and she said the same thing. She said she must, you know, maybe she's married to her brother's or her sister, you know. And then of course I know since that's not true. So also, I heard you say that you'd had enough of alcoholic detectives with the string of ex-wives, and you wanted to create something different. So please tell me, like, where did Cormac come from, and how did he come to be, and what were you thinking when you created him? Because to me, he feels so fresh and so real, and not like the typical detectives that we read generally in crime fiction.
That's so lovely. First of all, thank you, and it means so much to me hearing you say that, because I so admire you as a writer. So I really, that's lovely.
Let's just have a mutual, like, love it.
Thank you very much.
But I did, like, I remember that was the conversation when I read that book. Like, we were talking about how much we loved the book anyway, but we were convinced you knew a guard. Like,
do you know, it's funny because I have had a few policemen in Australia even say stuff like that to me, and I'm kind of laughing because I don't know any guards personally. I did have a chat with a detective sergeant in Dublin who was kind enough to talk to me. My brother knew him from a triathlon club, and we had a good chat on the phone where I could check a few things, which I mostly couldn't use because it wouldn't work for the book, you know, but I did adjust things still a little bit based on what he had said, and that really helped. But I've got 3 brothers, first of all. And secondly, I've worked with men my entire working life. I mean, as a young lawyer in Dublin, one of the nature of your job as a lawyer is you're kind of going into companies that are either doing big commercial deals or that are in crisis. So you're tend to be meeting with the leadership team. So for the time I've been 22, sadly, vast majority of the time I was the only woman in the room, you know. And so I've always worked with men. And then as my career went on as a lawyer, I worked a lot with heavy industry companies. And again, a lot of engineers. My husband's an engineer. So very male environments, if you like. And so I suppose I'm used to that sort of conversation. But what people have said, you know, the chat in the police station feels real. And I'm like, yeah, but every open plan work environment is the same. You know, it doesn't matter if it's a cop shop or if it's an engineering.
You are absolutely singing my tune, because when I was putting the 2 detectives in 56 Days, you wouldn't have seen it, of course, but there was a documentary. I think I told Barbara about it. There was a documentary on television here on Virgin Media that followed guards in the K district, which is like Blanchardstown and that area. And it was like fly on the wall. It was absolutely brilliant. But why it was brilliant is because we could have been watching people in their 20s and 30s in a hotel, which is my background, hospitality, or retail, or at a bar. Like, they were colleagues first and they were guards second. And that kind of, like, you know, workplace banter, the sort of, your work wife, your work husband, whatever you want to call it, like they have that too, of course. And they're not like all these, he'll break the rules to solve the case, like whatever. They're not all alcoholics with a string of ex-wives. They're just people like us. They're like us, except they're guards. So I honestly, totally agree.
I'm so glad we're on the same page. It's that human thing, I think. And I think as writers, you're trying to find a way in, and it has to feel real to you. So they have to feel like human people. And the whole, alcoholic ex-wife thing came from, I'm a huge Ian Rankin fan. I have every book he's ever read. I will be, like, he's one of those writers I go to the bookstore for the moment it's coming out, because I just have to get it. And he just gets better and better. I love his books. So don't get me wrong when I say this. But I remember reading a Rebus scene where his daughter, he hadn't spoken to his daughter in 2 years or something in this particular book. And he was sort of feeling sorry for himself, It's like, God, I've lost everybody. I'm so isolated and so on. And all I was thinking is, well, you could bloody call her. Like, that would be a start, His inability to maintain this relationship, and he gives nothing to it. And then he feels sorry for himself. And I was like, oh, shut up, And I just thought, it started me thinking, like, wow, we need people. Like, I want a hero. I want someone I can get behind. I want to believe in someone, but I also want that person to pick up the kids, because it's easy to be the hero if you have no responsibility outside of your own life. And if you can blithely ignore other humans as if they don't count, and, then feel like you're the victim. And I just thought, I want someone who has the pressure of also these other things in their life, but is a genuinely good person. And I suspect that Ian Rankin would agree with me about Rebus, because I've heard him talk about it. And, I know that he knows Rebus is no angel.
He
it's
probably
part of the
would.
appeal of him.
I'm gonna offer a comment here, because Benjamin Black, John Banville's crime name, which he's now abandoned because apparently it's a respectable thing to be writing, in his Quirk series, many of the things that you've talked about are actually on display, and they are now streaming on, I don't remember if it's Netflix or BritBox or whatever it is. There are 3 seasons of it. And, exactly as you say, Dervla, he can't speak up. I mean, all of his relationships are disastrous and dysfunctional, and it's mostly because he just won't talk. It's not just him, it's the other men as well. Now I realize that we're talking 50s, 1950s Ireland, and yet at the same time, I thought it was interesting that his daughter in the second season, anyway, his daughter is running around in the middle of the night in Dublin all by herself, all dressed up, looking posh, no escort, no safety, whatever it is. And I thought, okay, I don't remember that was a good idea to be doing it in the 50s. And so
I don't think that's a good idea now, Barbara.
Absolutely, and anyway, I thought it was an interesting window onto, Dublin at that point in time. But so much of what you're talking about is almost the antithesis of, now he has a new Quirk coming out, and I'm going to be really interested. I haven't had a chance to look at an advanced reading copy of it yet. I'm going to be really interested to see if it's changed at all. I mean, going back to his own identity as an author, is that going to make it, different, or is Quirk still going to be alcoholic and repressed and dysfunctional and a family life that's a disaster? I think it'll be fascinating. But are you in part, the reason I brought this up, in part, are you both writing in reaction to that sort of approach?
For me, I think it's partly a reaction. I definitely very consciously had a reaction to it, and the feeling that I also just want to like a character. I really want to like a character. I wish I could remember who said it, but someone who was writing a long series said that they wanted to write the person they wanted to like the person they were going to spend so much time with. I thought that's a really good point. But then the other thing is, I think it's generational. I really do. I don't recognize those men in the guys that we know. I mean, when I read about these guys who can't pick up the phone to their daughter, or who can't do this stuff, they're not the men I know. Like, I'm not, being smug, but my husband knows how to look after his kids. He knew how to change a nappy. So do all our friends, Like, most couples I know are struggling because it's really hard to just have 2 jobs and look after kids and, make life work. but we're struggling as partners. And sometimes one of us carries more load and sometimes the other one carries more load, depending on what's happening. There's no one that I know anymore where the guy gets to be, you know, dysfunctional and have all the sympathy. It doesn't work like that anymore, you know? So I just think it's changed in Ireland in one generation, for me anyway, because I know my dad's generation is totally different.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, but I think I come at it from a slightly different angle because I'm not married and I don't have children, and it's hard, and I'm old enough to have to say, you know, I wasn't married before. 40 next year, we won't go into it, but I have to really look hard to find people like me in contemporary crime fiction. And so I feel like I'm putting characters like that into my novels. So it's like a brand of what you just said, Dervla, but not exactly the same thing.
I missed the most important part of what you just said. My internet went down very briefly there. So
sorry, and I think Barbara might be, Barbara's back. Okay, everyone froze there for me for 1 second. All I said, Dervla, was that like I'm not married and I don't have kids, and in contemporary crime fiction, it's very hard to find a woman my age who does those two things or doesn't do those two things, who isn't the villain, who hasn't stolen the children who are missing because she's gone mental because she's childless, and you know, you can't be normal and not have children. So I feel like I put those characters into my books. No one ever notices until I point it out, but I don't have married couples and I don't have children if I can avoid it. And so I feel like I'm doing my little part over here, you know, to put the women I know and the people I know, the types of lives we're living now, into that, which, as you can imagine, if we went back even 20 years to Ireland, it would be a very different thing.
And I love that, because I think that's another part of the generational thing, that we're finally waking up to the fact that there's more than one way to live a life, you know. And like we were talking about the pressure to kind of work a certain kind of job, equally the pressure was there to, you know, marry and have children. That's your natural step.
Honestly, I don't know, we need to be best friends, because I don't know how many times I say there is more than one way to live a life, and I just think in Ireland, like, we all, for those who don't know, we have an end of school exam. So I guess they're kind of like the SATs, but everyone does it. It's called the Leaving Cert. And the pressure on the morning mine started, a girl fainted. She nearly gave herself like a stroke over it. There's helplines, you know, people have to get counseling over it, because there's all this pressure to do well in your Leaving Cert, get into college. Don't look up, because you'll get distracted. Go straight in September. But the job that you'll have for your life, the pension, then marriage house, etc. And I think, like, I don't see that. Like, when I lived briefly in Florida 15 years ago now, you know, I was looking around at people my age and they just didn't have that sort of ingrained, I need to do this and I need to do that. Since you brought up Ireland and women, right? I'm asking you this question selfishly because we're always asked it. Okay. And if your answer is good, I will steal it. So.
Oh no, I feel pressure now. I feel like this is my Leaving Cert.
The last time we spoke, and I said something, but I'm sure you'll be more articulate, and then I'll just repeat it the next time I'm asked. Why are there so many Irish female crime writers?
Oh my God.
Do you think, let's add on, in your opinion, why is there so many of us? Because there is a lot of us for such a small island.
I think there are a lot of female writers, and I think we happen to be writing crime because crime is where it's at right now. I think that crime is where it's been at for a long time, because first of all, it's the widest genre. You can put anything in a crime, and virtually everything gets called crime fiction, from the most literary fiction to, you know, very, very commercial fare, and everything in between. And the plot does not have to have any particular kind of structure or approach. You know, there are a few little subcategories that still kind of exist, like police procedural, etc. But basically you can do whatever you like in a crime novel as a writer, which is fantastic. I think there are so many writers in Ireland because we are storytellers in our culture. It's always been there, and I think our time has just sort of come. I think we probably, writing in Ireland has always been a thing. And I think for women, we're just making it our thing where before perhaps it wasn't, and people feel, you know, women are right. You know what? Here's my theory. It's taken me a while to get here, but this is my theory. Most readers are women. You know, statistically, it's something like 80% are women. And I think if you think of something like cultural cringe, right? You know, we were brought up thinking that, I don't know if it was the same for you, Catherine, but when I was very young, I was born in 1976. So I grew up in Ireland really in the early, you know, the 80s and early 90s. And there was still very much a hierarchy of cultural importance. Men's stuff was more important. Men's sport was vastly more important. Men's work was more important. And I absorbed all that. It was only as I hit into my 30s and stuff that I started to wake up and go, hang on, this doesn't make sense, you know? But I was fully believing, like I accepted these kinds of cultural rules. And I think possibly the thing is that as women, we put men's work a bit higher up on the totem pole to our own. And so women's writing was seen as sort of, you know, cute and sweet and domestic and, you know, just smaller. Yeah. And we probably bought more male writers. And as we've kind of shrugged off all that, we're really interested in hearing women's voices. And I think it's probably similar things are happening all around the world. Other people are looking to hear other voices that are interesting because we haven't heard as much of them. So I think women want to hear from women because women have a particular lens on the world. So I think it's maybe a bigger market, which has opened it up to us. That's my theory.
Yeah. Also the most fun and everyone.
Theory. I want to hear your answer to this.
My answer was I think, well, my stock answer, which I usually go to, is that I was born in 1982. So my adolescence was the 90s when all these women were literally vanishing off the roads here in Ireland. Leinster's missing women, and we still don't, you know, no one know it. Like if you want to look up, if you Google the Vanishing Triangle Ireland 1990s, you'll find all the cases. That's what was in the news. And I think, you know, adding that onto the history of this country and mother and baby homes and all that, you know, you felt like your country wasn't a safe place for you. And I also think, you know, you kind of touched on it earlier when you were talking about the way we write our characters and the way we write the men, you know, to reflect the men in our lives, that women are so intimately familiar with fear. It's not a hypothetical. It's not an abstract. It's every goddamn day deciding, how do I get home from wherever I am? And I think the combination of those two things, and also, you know, because the more of us who do it, the more of us do it, you know, so there is sort of a sort of explosion of Irish female crime writers as well. So now, Dervla, I would like you to tell me all your secrets, and I will take it down. How do you write a book? So
no, I'm going to turn it on you now, actually, because I've genuinely been so blown away by 56 Days, and I'm finding it, even though the story is utterly compelling and I'm going faster and faster and faster as I go, at the same time, as a writer, I keep pausing to just appreciate it. The structure that you have under that book, that you must have put under that book to make it sing like that. First of all, your tense choices are really interesting. And the immediacy of the scenes between the cops, the way you wrote that, I wondered, was that very deliberate? And did it take more than one go to choose the tense you're working in? Because you do it sort of like
I wish I had a good answer to this.
Honestly, it's an easy one to write in, I think, the way how you've chosen to do it.
I honestly didn't think about it in terms of tenses. I do know that the book I'm writing now is totally different. It is like past tense. But the first thing I ever wrote for 56 Days was the opening scene, where you know, it's like the voice of God, like there isn't one really point of view, and you're descending into this apartment building where the neighbors are gathered. And I don't know where that came from. I have never written, I don't think, anything like that voice, but maybe it was because the world was on fire and nothing was, you know, nothing, I wasn't standing on anything steady. I don't know where it came from, but it came out that way. And I just got really excited, and I was like, this is how I'm going to do the today parts. And I just followed it through. But I don't think about, I suppose I didn't make an actual decision, is how I would put it.
I I hate you.
I'm
so
just trying to get the thing finished before the deadline. That's like
I'm amazed by you then, because you just must be an absolute natural. I thought it was a considered choice because of the way it worked in the book, and also
I will
I don't think
totally pretend from now on that it was a considered choice. I'll be like, I did that to reflect, you know, the immediacy of the
but
That's
honestly, it works so
so-
beautifully, and it just goes to show what they always say: like, to be a writer, you must be a reader, you must be a reader, you must be a reader, because you absorb so much as a reader, and then you can do what you just did, which is just naturally find a voice and write it that way. I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. And in terms of how the book is structured, I won't give anything away, obviously, because that would be terrible.
Yeah.
But the way you're moving through time is, again, incredibly difficult to pull off. Like having two different voices and effectively three different voices, I find in a book very rarely it's done well, because usually you fall in love with one voice, and then every time you shift to the other,
and you're waiting to
it's not like that at all. Because every time I'm getting a new insight. So that beautiful thing where they always say, ask a question, answer the question, ask a question, answer, because it keeps the reader moving through. That works so beautifully, because when I change to a character, I'm like, oh my God, what was he thinking? What was he actually thinking when he did that? And I'm desperate to know. How did you come up with that? Did it take, was that trial and error, or did you just know going in that that's what you're going to do?
So I feel like I'm just wiping all the mystery away, because the answer is so simple. I just knew what really happened. So I start off with this is what happened, and I have my trusty Excel spreadsheet, which is like color coded to within an inch of its life, because I love a procrastination. Never met a procrastination exercise I didn't love. So I knew today is the 1st of May in the reality of the book, and I knew that the body they find is going to have to be there for 2 weeks. So that means that on this day this thing has to happen, and they have to meet on this day, and I'm filling it in. And when like, I don't know how you work, and I'm going to demand that you tell me after this, but like, I have to have the end. I have to have the truth, because I don't genuinely understand how you can write without that. Like, I would never get past the first couple of chapters. When I know what really happened, I have the luxury then of revealing it in whatever way I like. So it was actually, I don't want to say easy, but it was relatively easy to say, okay, this is going to happen then. And now when I go back to that and we revisit that scene, this is what's going to happen, because it was like I had a calendar and I was just filling in what, I was doing on each day. And I could do that because I knew the truth. Yeah. I knew the real sequence of events.
You make it sound very easy, but that book, I mean, it is so smooth. Like, can I ask how many drafts?
3. I always do 3. I always do
3 drafts. Oh my God, I hate you so much. I can't. You're just raw talent then, because it's so beautifully written. It is so beautifully written, and I'm sorry to be fangirling so much, but really, I'm so in awe.
In case anyone feels bad, when I say drafts, I literally I rewrite the book again. Okay. So I write the whole book 3 times. Okay. I don't just go in and change stuff. I literally document, start again. Yeah.
Okay. Like you work, but with the existing text that you've already written.
Yeah. So you can see just behind me here, there's my really wide computer screen. And I love it because I will have my previous draft and then my lovely new clean, empty, full of possibility and possible perfection, never Word document. And I work side by side. But
that sounds really interesting.
It never comes out the way you're reading it. I think we all have to remember that as writers and readers, that the book on the shelf is not just my 3 drafts. It's months of percolation. It's my editors. I have 2 editors, because an editor works with my agent, and then I have my actual editor at the publishing house. And so it's just, you get there bit by bit. I wish it came out in the first draft
As
and we were
agreed,
done
yeah.
and we could go to the beach and relax for the rest of the year, but we cannot do that.
No.
Alas.
And yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking, because to read those books that read so beautifully and so easily, the work that goes into making them flow like that is sometimes not seen, you know, and because it's about the story, it's about the reader experience, and you're really writing for the reader experience to give them that, and I think you do it so well. So
you need to remember that everybody reads a book differently. So regardless of the effort you put into it, and regardless of whether the published book lives up to the book that, you know, the platonic book that existed, because all books have three forms. This is an absolute truth. There's the ideal book that you want to write, then there's the actual book that you wrote. And then there's the book that every reader reads. And no matter how hard you try, my experience of reading your book is going to be different than another's. And, you know, I mean, for coming right up on 32 years of hosting author events and listening to questions, I can't tell you how often the author, trying to conceal it, is just stunned by whatever question the reader asked. It's like, seriously?
Yeah.
Did I write that? How did you that? You know,
true.
Whatever it is, or, you know, as we've already discussed, I can't really remember it, Barbara, because I wrote it 2 years ago, and you're going to have to answer this for me. You know, because of the time gap. But I do think it's really important to remember as a writer that every reader reads your book differently, and therefore criticism is no absolute. Criticism is really relational, you know, depending on the reader. And I often see authors get upset by critical comments, and I want to say to them, but, you know, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't, you know, because this person is a different reader than that person.
And there's so many reviews on the internet now that no matter what the review says, you can go and find one that says the opposite. So
well,
that's really,
I love that.
You know, that's so true. But I think you just have to be true to yourself as the author. And I also think it's important for readers. I often say to readers, not as often as I used to, that, you know, you don't have to finish a bad book. I mean, you know, I'm of a generation where we had to finish our plates in case the starving children in China, you know, missed out. And you didn't really start a book unless you were going to finish it. But what I've learned is life's too short to read bad books.
I agree.
And, you know, I have to look at hundreds of them every month. So, you know, I go in and I get as far as I am. And if I'm bored by the voice, actually, I don't even care what the book's about. It's all about voice for me. If I'm not interested in the voice, you know, then I don't care what happens in the book, which is why I say everybody reads books differently too, because, you know, you could meet 3 people at a party and we could disagree on who was the most interesting of those people. But I really have tried to encourage our customers, if you're reading a book and it's not for you, just put it down. It's okay. You know, there's other books out there.
You don't need to slog through them. I completely agree.
No.
40 pages generally is what I give it. At 40, 50
I think you should call
Patrick in.
Patrick, come and join us. You know, you can make this less of a hen party and more of a, you know, more balanced, so that we have the ratio, the ratio of readers.
I can't tell you how much I've been enjoying this conversation.
It's been great.
It's been great.
Patrick actually is, you know, Irish heritage, and so he's our Celt on the Poison Pen staff, and
with a suitably Irish name. I mean, honestly, I could talk to Dervla for another whole hour, but I know that like time is.
I do feel like we've just been having a chat, though. I don't know if this concept.
No, I forgot there was someone else there.
Like we should have a cup of tea, like, and then what did you do?
Yeah. You guys are going to have to solve the time zone problem, though, if you really want to be talking
just have to
each
get to
other,
Ireland,
because you're on the business of the day.
I'll see her soon.
Patrick, do we have any questions that anybody's posed, or do you have questions?
Let's see. Well, it seems like for all of our events, somebody asks about audiobooks. You know, they've become more and more prevalent in our culture and popular. And this Leon says, fun to see you both. Your audiobooks have gotten me through the last 18 months, which is a nice comment. Have you both, what kind of input do you have into your audiobooks? Do you like how they've turned out?
I can't listen to mine because it's too weird. It's too weird. Blackstone who published The Good Turn by Dervla as well, are obviously amazing with audio because that's what they did for 3 decades before they went into print. And they take such care, and they will send me, narrators, and they do an amazing job. Alana Kerr-Collins has narrated, I think, at least a part of every one of my books, and she gets rave reviews, but I can't listen to them because it's my voice in my head reading the book, and I know where the emphasis is and how, and hearing someone else say it, I can't. I just cannot. But I know they're good. I know Blackstone do a great job. So yeah.
I'm the same. I've never listened to any of mine other than just samples and stuff, but I was so happy with my narrator. In the early days when The Rune was published, I was very so happy to be published, and I just said yes to absolutely everything. Would you like this? Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. But when they sent me the narrators, they sent me some samples, and I listened to them, and it was the first time I just kind of said, I can't say yes to this, because I just feel like you really need someone who can tell a story, who can tell a story and have the flow, and it's a hard skill. And so I just listened to every Irish reader that I could find, and I came across Aoife McMahon, who had read a few books recently at the time, and I just thought, oh my God, she's amazing. So I sent please, I'm really sorry, but would you mind terribly? Is it possible? Do you think we could maybe do this? And they just reached out, and Aoife was available, thankfully, and she said yes. So she read the 3 books, which has been brilliant, but very different now for the next book, because obviously there'll be American voices, so that's been weird, kind of trying to figure that one out. But we've got great narrators, so it's going to be cool.
Why are you writing an American book?
Thank you so much, Barbara, because it's been killing me. I wanted to ask that question. I'm dying to know.
This is an American story, and it had to be in America. It had to be set in the States because of the story. And when I was a college student, I don't know if you guys would know Barbara and Patrick, but there's a grand Irish tradition of Irish college students going to the States for a summer. We get a J1 visa, which allows us to work for up to 4 months. And basically we go to America with all of our friends. We live about 95 people to one room. We work 3 or 4 different jobs. We kind of pretend that we're going to save money for college fees, and mostly we just party. And then we come back to Ireland and go back to college. So that's what everybody does. And I did that for 2 summers. And one of them was spent in Maine, working as a chambermaid in the morning and a waitress in the evening. And so this book is set in Maine and Virginia. So I only got to visit Virginia for about a week when I happened to be in the States, and I was wildly jet lagged. So I'm not quite sure how those scenes will come out. But the story, because it revolves around a little bit around the death penalty, I had to be in the States.
Got it. That's so interesting that it's Maine. John Connolly, Maine is mostly Charlie Parker. And it was a wonderful Dutch writer called, what was his name? He wrote the Vandervalk, but I'm trying to remember.
Van de Vettering. Yeah.
Yeah. And he wrote about Maine. So there's something magical about Maine.
Something very so beautiful and green and dark, and maybe because Stephen King has set so many of his books there, I think it kind of captures our imagination a little bit.
And it's a border state, and it's a seacoast state, so really in lots of ways it's not that different than Ireland. But all right, well, I will certainly look forward to your American book. And why were you so shy, Catherine? Why didn't you ask her again?
No, I just because I didn't want to take up loads of time. What I really wanted to know, it's a standalone, am I right? So you're leaving the series. Like how do you feel about that?
Great. I know. I mean, it's. I'm not saying I won't go back to the series, but I love that my characters in the series. I love Cormac Riley, and I love writing him. But it was really exciting to just have a totally free hand and just be able to do anything. And oh my God, I can be anywhere and go anywhere. There are no constraints. Because when you're writing a series as a writer, as time moves on, certain areas have become boxed off. They're not available to you anymore. And so suddenly all those constraints were gone. So that was really good fun. But it was also sad and hard because there's something very familiar. You could slip back into a series and you have those things to lean on as well. So I missed that. And certain things were very challenging writing a book in the States. That was obviously, I'm an Irish woman and I live in Australia. And so trying to shift and things I really didn't expect to become an issue. I've had American culture in my life since I was born. We've got American TV, American books, American politics, American news. constantly. And so you think you have absorbed certain things, and then you just, no, you get things wrong. But then also, I think might have been you, Barbara, said to me, I think I might have said this to you before, that my editor in the States in New York said to me, Dervla, we would just not invite each other into homes like that. That just would not happen. It takes way longer. We're much more at the door. And I think it might have been you, Barbara, said, don't forget there are cultural differences within the States. So, that it isn't necessary.
No, there's a huge cultural difference between, I used to live back in Virginia, and I grew up in Chicago, and I went to college in California, and now I live in Arizona, and they are all very different. Patrick is a native Arizonan. One of the few, I might add. Mostly Arizonans are for somewhere else. It was, it's a new state. What is it, 49th? Trying to remember. No, 47th, I think it is, or 48th, whichever. Alaska and Hawaii came after Arizona and New Mexico, but in the scheme of things. So it was a frontier state for a long time. And frontier states, regardless, tend to attract the radical right and the radical left. A comment one of my friends from Alaska, very good author named Dana Stabenow, made, which I think is absolutely true. And, it's just different than a much more formal back east culture. So, but if you're writing as an outsider, is your character American? I mean, you don't have an Irish person in Maine. You have an actual Maine person in Maine, because you can get away with a lot if you take an outsider to a new place. That's a whole different experience.
The story, I think, started that way, in that I had an young Irish daughter, but then she had to be American. And so I've got some things are familiar to me. I know what it's like to be a law student, I know that sort of stuff, but it's different to write her as an American. So it was really, I loved it. I mean, I loved the whole process of it, and the story was very exciting. So it was fun.
Well, there are plenty of Americans who'd be happy to read your story and tell you whether you got some of it
Everyone
right.
got wrong. I'm really looking forward to that.
I would recommend doing that though before the book comes out, so you don't have to read them on the internet.
Yes, it's way better to do it ahead of. Yeah, good point. There's a sequence that needs to be observed. Anything else, Patrick?
Yeah, I have a quick question for both of you. In America, of course, a lot of the regional distinctions are kind of being diluted, and we're losing our regional accents that we had. I mean, they're still there, but I know Ireland has very different, probably subtle to an outsider, differences in accents. Catherine, would you have what would be considered a classic Dublin accent?
No, I'm from Cork, and I don't have a Cork accent or a Dublin accent. So I don't know what accent, because when, I used to work abroad a lot, and also I think when you come to Cork, the edges, like in Cork, there's a river in the middle of the city, and my parents live on the south side, and a lot of our family live on the north side. It's probably a 15-minute drive from one to the other, and we sound completely different.
Really?
And I'm strong enough, I would say, to be detected by people who are not from the city. So I just feel like I've, when I came to Dublin especially, and because I, have a job where I talk to people who are not from Cork a lot of the time, I've sort of kind of lost the edges of it. But if I go home and talk to my mom, it comes back.
What about you, Dervla? You've been away for so long.
I think it neutralizes it. I think I've got a pretty neutral Irish accent, but I don't know what I sound like to other people. Do we sound the same to you guys, me and Catherine?
No, you don't. And you know what? What's the common thing that I hear when I talk to both of you is there's a lilt. There's an upward kind of a lilt. There's a little bit of almost a musical note in the way that you talk, but you do sound differently. And of course, Australians speak very differently than, so you're bound. I mean, I remember when I showed up at Stanford from Chicago, people would laugh and say car, because that was the Midwest car, that flat A and so forth.
Yeah.
And over time, car became car. Arizona doesn't really have a regional accent, Patrick, does it? Because people mostly came from somewhere else.
I don't know. I mean, they say it does, but I actually was born in California, but I came
you
here when I
were?
was 3, so I guess I'm a native.
Well, I
Um,
think of you as a native. Anyway,
Yeah,
but I mean,
Yeah.
Irish voices are beautiful. There's a certain magic to Irish voices, I think, certainly for most Americans. And whenever I talk to one of you, I always hear that beautiful lilt. You know, I don't care if it's John Connolly or Adrian or whatever.
and again, Stuart Neville, that northern accent is very different.
It is
Very.
different, and I don't know if you two know it, but there's an actor from Northern. I've got to look up his name here because I feel like an idiot. From Northern Ireland, who is a big person, a big star in Line of Duty, which is the
Oh yeah.
the
Adrian
tall-
Dunbar, do you mean?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So he has done a wonderful travel log, which Patrick, I want you to watch. And he basically is going around coastal Ireland. He's doing like the wild, Atlantic way, but he
Yeah.
starts at the farthest southern tip where there's a bridge that's been rebuilt. And he goes all the way up past the Aran Islands, the whole bit, and comes around the top, and he goes to the Giant's Causeway and the whole bit, and he ends up in the mountains of Bourne. And yet he has a very different accent when he's doing Line of Duty on British television. He doesn't sound as Irish as he does doing.
I
the
thought that was his
travel
real accent on Line of Duty. I feel lied to. He has a different accent to that.
Well, I think he does, but it may be that it's like you going back to Cork. I think it may be that
Yeah,
simply
exactly.
when here he is doing a thing, which is basically doing a travel thing to go around Ireland
Yeah.
for people, he probably slides back into more of an Irish voice. But even in Line of Duty, if you really listen, there is that bit of a lilt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit of a kind of an up. I don't know exactly what I mean by lilt, but it's
There's a bit of a rhythm to the sound. And Catherine, I can hear a little bit of Cork. You still have a bit of Cork.
I still have a little bit. I mean, but, you would detect it. But the thing is, when I'm in Cork, people accuse me of having a Dublin accent, and then when I'm in Dublin, people accuse me of having a Cork accent. So it's just
Depends where you are.
just somewhere in the middle.
You
There's a
have
bit of a
to adjust to
breathiness to
where
it.
you are. Sorry.
well, we could do this for another hour, but probably
easy.
we've trespassed on your good nature and your time long enough
Not at
here.
all.
Plus, we have one more Zoom event to go. This is number 2 today. This is a particularly
oh my
dense
God.
day, and and it's one of the things I find so fascinating about this is the astonishing pivot from subject to subject. I mean, Alice's book that we just talked about, Rock, Scissors, Paper, is Scotland, and it's a very twisty kind of a thriller. And now we've talked to the two of you about very different books. And then I have a diamond-based thriller kind of fascinating book set in Arctic Canada, where the Chinese are trying to stake out a position in order to lay claim to some of the Arctic, which is exactly the same story
Wow.
that Brad Thor wrote about in his bestseller in July, except he was in Norway and Svalbard, and this guy's in Canada. But otherwise, it's the same story. So, I feel as though there's a sort of schizophrenia that goes on with me and Patrick in a day like today, right?
I don't know how you guys do it.
We're
I don't know
revolving, and we're revolving from country to country today. I mean, we're taking in the UK, Australia, Ireland, and pretty soon Canada and China.
I don't know
It's
whether
like magic, all in one day.
I can't decide whether I'm intensely jealous of you guys or if I'm slightly scared. Does it sound like really hard work, or does it sound like the most glorious way to spend the day? I'm 50-50 on that one.
It's both. And, you'd be surprised how much work it is, to do it. But it really is. And we've never been lonely during the pandemic, not even for a minute. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, for Dervla getting up so early and Catherine staying up so late. I can't recommend both books more highly. 56 Days, we still have a few signed copies of. Dervla's book we have in stock now, and both are terrific. If you didn't read The Rune and The Scholar, this is your chance to think of them as kind of a trilogy. And buy all three. They're all 3 paperbacks of this size, and so it's wonderful. Anyway, I hope to see you both again soon, and maybe, oh joy, you'll be able to come to Scottsdale and we could do this in person.
That would be
amazing.
great.
Thank you so much.
It would
Thank
be
you
nice.
so much.
Thank you
so
very
much.
much. Good night, everybody, or in
Bye.
our case, good afternoon.